Hey, welcome to Tell Me How You're Mighty, real talk about cheating. I'm Tracy Shorn, the blogger known as Chump Lady, where I implore people to leave cheaters and gain lives.
And I'm Sarah Gorrell, radio broadcaster by day, single mother of 4. And 13 years ago, my ex walked out on his family for his affair partner. And it didn't feel like it at the time, but my life is so much better without him.
And we're here to tell you that you are mighty. We survived infidelity, and you can too. And this is our podcast. Welcome. Our guest today is Dr. Omar Minwalla. Dr. Minwalla is a psychologist and clinical sexologist who founded the Institute for Sexual Health. It's a sexual health clinic for infidelity and sexual compulsivity, and he's one of the first to use a trauma model to treat the intimate partner or spouse. Readers of the Chump Lady blog know Dr. Minwalla as the author of The Secret Sexual Basement, where he uses the terms deceptive sexuality and deceptive sexuality trauma to describe the chump experience. Welcome, Dr. Minwalla. You describe cheating as a psychological operation used to gain control, much like psych ops in the military. Can you tell us how you came to see infidelity as controlling and abusive? Because it seems like obvious to chumps, but sadly, this seems to be a rare perspective among therapists.
That's a lot to say that infidelity is like a psychological operation. So if I can just break that down a little bit. So when we think about infidelity, our mind usually goes to it's a sex problem, and our mind goes to sex, the relationship, pornography, whatever the problematic sexual behavior is. What I'm trying to say is let's think of it as a two-part problem. Yes, there's the sex part, and then there's this dishonesty problem. And I call that in clinical language an integrity abuse problem, but let's just call it a dishonesty problem. And that includes things like lying by omission, and intentional manipulation of somebody's reality, which I call IMR, intentionally manipulating someone's reality, otherwise known as gaslighting. There's a lot of harmful behaviors that relate to keeping two worlds separate. And that's the agenda. Every psychological operation, for example, a military psychological operation has an agenda. The agenda in this case is keeping two worlds separate. Every abuser who's engaged in infidelity or is deceptively hiding part of their sexual life is engaged in deceptive compartmentalization. And that's where this metaphor of a secret sexual basement comes in. Picture a house, a relationship, and one person builds a secret sexual basement underneath the house, and the people upstairs don't know. That's called deceptive compartmentalization. And the agenda becomes, for the abuser, how do I keep these two worlds separate? And in order to keep those two worlds separate, there needs to be an operation. And that operation ends up being a system of lies, lying by omission, and gaslighting, which is the intentional manipulation of someone's reality. The behaviors themselves, the lying, the deflection, the intentional manipulation of someone's reality, those behaviors themselves are abusive behaviors. They harm people emotionally, psychologically, and relationally. Those behaviors and actions, which we can call abusive because they become patterns. And then those patterns of manipulation and lying and deflection and twisting the truth, those patterns then create conditions. And so the people upstairs of the secret sexual basement are actually being exposed to not just harmful actions, but harmful patterns that become conditions. And that's what I mean by systemic abuse. It's a whole psychological operation. And in the military, it's the exact same thing. A psychological operation is often a covert, deliberate deception, and it's a tactic intentionally persuading and influencing how people are thinking, feeling, behaving, changing their attitudes.
Yeah. I mean, in the military, you have an enemy and there's a power struggle. And just by putting it in those terms, I think you're onto something that so many people are not, which is that these people aren't on the same team as you. They're operating from a power dynamic and not a relationship, of mutuality and mutual respect. And that is such a shift mentally when you're in it. to recognize that this person does not have your welfare in their mind and that they've done the cost benefit analysis, and that objective, whatever we're going to call it, is more important than not causing you harm or your children harm.
Yes, absolutely, Tracy. So if we're going to use this metaphor of abasement, the agenda of keeping those two worlds separate becomes a priority over the people upstairs, and the people upstairs become deprioritized over that agenda. And that's what's so dehumanizing and painful. And the whole system of intentional manipulated reality is a whole system of harm. The whole time it's operating, people are being shaped psychologically, emotionally, and relationally in harmful, toxic ways. The opposite acronym, intentionally accurate, authentic reality, is health promoting. IMR, intentionally manipulated reality, is disease promoting. So the whole time there's a secret sexual basement, the people upstairs are being subjected to a toxic system. And it actually is shaping them in a toxic, negative way, because that intentional manipulation has a lot of negative health ramifications, including an impact on their second brain, their enteric system, a lot of confusion, questioning their reality, emotional impacts, relational impacts.
We lived it, Sarah and I know. We had a few basements.
I think there were several basements going on in my life. And what's really interesting here is that when you talk about this, the focus is on the manipulation, the deceit, and so often that sort of seems to be pushed to one side, and the focus is on the sex rather than that. I would imagine it is the deceit and the manipulation that is in lots of ways more harmful. What sort of trauma do you see from the victims in your practice?
Yeah, so that kind of intentional manipulation of reality and gaslighting, it's like I'm saying, a systemic psychological abuse. And that's going to shape somebody slowly, like drops of water on a rock. One drop is not probably going to make a big difference, but a drop of water on a rock for hundreds of years is going to really shape very slowly and progressively. And that's what complex trauma shaping is. It shapes the thought system. It shapes the emotional system. It shapes how somebody slowly relates to themselves and knows themselves, how they relate to the abuse itself and the abuser. It shapes how they relate to humans in general, and it shapes the meaning of life. Those are the 6 psychological systems that are slowly impacted with intentional manipulated reality. And so there's people who've been in a relationship where they've been gaslighted for 30 years. We'll call those 6 systems the ego spinal cord, with this basement that they didn't know existed.
And it's harming them. We'll just come back to it's incredibly painful. And I know it sounds like it's obvious, but when I went through this like 16 years ago, the discourse was, there was such a disconnect between what you're describing. This is primal, this kind of hurt, this kind of harm, versus it's akin to not being asked to the prom. You're a little bit of collateral damage. Esther Perel, affairs are exuberant acts of defiance. And the whole discourse is around the naughty good times, and you're not mating in captivity, and, woo, yay you, and completely ignores the trauma that you just put somebody through by stealing their reality and having sex that they didn't consent to. And, there's a whole other overlay of this. Can you talk a bit about, you've described your own work as being a lightning rod, and that you have gotten flack for this focus on deception and harm. And it seems like you're coming from a helping profession. Why is this so hard to get? Is it the focus that we think that people aren't abusive, that they just have shame and they didn't mean to hurt you with their prostitute habit? Where is this coming from?
Wow, that's a lot, Tracy.
I have a lot to unpack, but go.
And Sarah, you brought it up as well. And I always sort of start with this, which is, first of all, not as a 2-dimensional, but a 3-dimensional problem with this metaphor of a secret sexual basement, because it's not just a line that's crossed, it's a reality that's created. And a big part of my career, you're right, Tracy, has been trying to name this. And the way I've sort of organized it, first it was naming the trauma, and that was very controversial, still is, I think, sometimes. And then naming it as abuse, and that's still very controversial. And that's really the problem is our mind goes to the sex part and what the behavior is in the basement. Our mind doesn't go to why is it in a basement?
Yes.
How do you keep it in a basement for so long? And what do you call that? That whole creation and maintenance of a secret, separate, compartmentalized life. It's literally a double life. We know so many people, so many guys say I lived a double life. How do you name that? Which I was just starting to do with it's a system, a psychological operation of intentionally manipulated reality. Seeing the A word and seeing the T word is really hard for society. Even when it comes to domestic violence, we have to see blood, and we only use the A word if we see really drastic abuse that's physical. We're really behind in understanding psychological abuse. And that goes even for the profession. It's really hard for the profession to get off the sex and just for a minute turn around and look over at, wow, the dishonesty problem. What about this psychological operation of dishonesty for 30 years? And what about all the shaping that's happened to the people upstairs? Just because they don't know about the basement doesn't mean they're not being shaped. This whole narrative of what she doesn't know won't hurt her is self-deception. It's a fallacy. And the psychological field has really become very stuck and entrenched on what do we call the sex part? Is it an addiction? Is it out of control? Is marriage really something we should look at the underlying questions and be curious about? And I'm fine with all of those discussions, but what's missing is any recognition of the psychological abuse part, which ends up being a system of gaslighting for years. Can I just throw out one thing in terms of why are we missing the abuse piece, which is really interesting because obviously I researched this a lot. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the fifth version, DSM-5, the diagnosis that they're pointing out there is actually spouse and partner abuse, psychological, and there's a diagnostic code for it. And one of the examples they give for psychological abuse is trying to make the victim think that he or she is crazy. That's a direct quote from the DSM. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual actually names under spouse and partner abuse psychological gaslighting. And the number one symptom of somebody with a secret sexual basement who's been exposed to that is crazy making and feeling like they're going crazy.
Do you think that it's minimized the dishonesty part because people think, well, everybody has something they're a little ashamed of or, tells a white lie about or fibs? And that we're going to excuse this because of this whole idea of toxic shame. They're just ashamed of what's in their basement, their kink or whatever. It's certainly something I wrestled with or I see other people wrestle with on my blog. And the conclusion I came to is that no, you have a basement for a reason, and it's to maintain entitlement. It's because it's good to be king. It's good to have a harem. It's good to have cake. And that's what you're trying to preserve. It's not that you can't bring your basement out into the open. It's that you want the unlevel playing field. You want all the goodies and none of the accountability. And to say that is a value judgment. To me, it seems like therapists are not allowed to make value judgments. That makes you the bad shrink because you had a value. You judged them or something. I don't know. Am I off base here?
What therapists do seem to do is make a value judgment on the person who's being abused.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So it'll be right. Look at you. You've driven them to their basement. Look at you with your awful ways. So all the judgment focuses on the person who shouldn't be judged, who is subject to this awful abuse, this manipulation. And yet they're the ones that just made to feel utterly ashamed of driving their partner to the basement.
I think you guys are bringing up a lot of really important points. So yes, sexual shame can drive someone to create a basement. It doesn't justify it. It might be one of the reasons. However, if we're going to talk about why especially men build secret sexual lives and secret sexual basements, you have to talk about sexual entitlement. And there's so much research about sexual entitlement and how sexual entitlement is a big factor of problematic sexuality, including rape. It's actually a risk factor. It's a type of psychology. Sexual entitlement is a belief system of deserving. And a lot of men, consciously and unconsciously, are groomed through social scripts into a belief system that they deserve a secret sexual basement. The word abuse is not on the radar. And among men, having a secret sexual basement actually often makes you gain masculine status. You actually gain points, high fives from other guys. So, yes, Tracy, you're absolutely right. Sexual entitlement is a very important reason and psychological contributor to why men in particular feel so comfortable and encouraged to build secret sexual basements. And without the word abuse, it only adds to encouraging that, which is why it's so important to start looking at cheating as abuse and as an integrity problem that is really harmful. Using appropriate language is what we learn as psychologists, and when to use appropriate language, including abuse, sexual entitlement. The idea that you're being judgy and that you shouldn't use that language is ridiculous. It's laughable.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, you're preaching to the choir, but you don't find that you get some flack among fellow therapists for this, for calling a spade a spade?
Yeah, you're right. This has been my whole career, is the slack for saying the T word, trauma. And now I'm on to the A word, and it'll probably be another decade of slack. And that's why I appreciate you guys and you, Tracy, your blog and everything, because similarly, you have been voicing something very important, something that people aren't seeing. And there's a whole industry that's not seeing the abuse and not seeing the trauma and not validating your experiences properly or even ethically. So I appreciate your journey in pushing against the tide and against really patriarchy and masculinity and toxic ways of thinking and outdated ways of thinking. So I think that's what we have in common, is that that's slack, I guess. That's slack.
But Tracy, you must have had as well. And we had a recent conversation with someone with a very different viewpoint to you, another therapist, who sort of portrayed you as some bitter harridan for having these views. And actually, I was reading an article in the paper the other day, and it was about someone who'd lived an entire double life and had two women on the go. And I always love looking at the comments underneath. And the comments were very much, oh, well, it's none of our business. Let him get on with it and do what he wants to do. It's nobody's business. And when it comes to abuse, nobody would stand by and allow abuse, but we seem as a society very, very happy to stand by and look on affairs and this kind of double lives as none of our businesses and somebody else's business.
Yeah, we look the other way and we don't validate, especially psychological abuse. We don't even see it in the psychological field. So society doesn't even see it, which makes it even worse for victims and survivors, because on every level, from institutions to society to friends, just to people in public and public discourse, their experience is completely invalidated. Nobody sees the abuse, the trauma, or their experience. If you look at the literature by the American Psychological Association, and this is a direct quote, if intimate partner abuse and relationship abuse exists, then we have a responsibility to recognize it, address it, or appropriately refer. So it is actually really important in our field when there is abuse to not look the other way. We don't actually have the right to just interpret it the way we want. We have certain ethical obligations to recognize it, address it, or appropriately refer.
I think that's really good to know. And sadly, my blog is full of bad therapy experiences. And as I pointed out, I call it the reconciliation industrial complex. There's a whole for-profit model out there, $7,400 and I'll affair-proof your marriage, that wants people to stay stuck in these dynamics because it's profitable. And the people who want these abusers to change tend to be the vulnerable partners who are tied up with them. I mean, why does Willie Sutton rob banks? Because that's where the money is. I mean, it's the same for, sadly, a lot of the therapy industry. I'm sorry to say that. And maybe they're doing it with the best of intentions, really believing that this is the way, marriages can be saved. But it's a very different thing when you call it abuse. Do you really want to save a marriage to an abuser? I always find it's interesting if you put it on financial terms. If someone was stealing the petty cash, would you want to know? Yeah, I'd want to know. Somebody's embezzling your pension fund. Would you want to know? Yeah, I'd want to know. Well, if somebody is risking your health, and for women, your fertility, and, all sorts of very serious things that can happen from unprotected sex with strangers, if you want to get into it, you'd want to know, right? I mean, this is a real harm. We have some questions from our readers for you.
Right, this is a really interesting one, and I often wonder this. It's complex, isn't it? And it must take a lot of effort to lead this double life. So this first question is, my question is, why do men with a secret sexual basement get married at all? It's the 21st century. Staying single is socially acceptable. My fuckwit was cheating on me with sex workers for our entire relationship, dating, engaged, marriage. I get that he's disordered. I just don't get why he'd go to the trouble of layering a family on top of his preferred lifestyle. That is such a good question.
That is such a good, profound question. And it's a really complex answer. We could do another whole podcast on that. I will share this, that a lot of my model looks at how boys and men are shaped psychologically in terms of masculinity. And there is a lot of research on how men's psyches are shaped in unhealthy ways. For example, boys can't cry. We know that that's going to cause really unhealthy outcomes for adult men who can't emotionally regulate. So that's a social script, a proscript, and a prescript. Prescripts are things you're supposed to do, and proscripts are things you're not supposed to do. So there's a whole idea of how are boys and men's psyche shaped. Now, a lot of the way they're shaped is really unconscious to them. The discussion of how gender is shaped is often largely unconscious to a lot of humans right now. It's a new kind of way of thinking. How is gender shaped? And is it healthy, the way society shapes gender? When it comes to men, it's really problematic. And just to add to this, in 20 years of my practice, one thing in really serious moments that I've asked men over the years, 2 questions. Why did you get married? And why did you have kids? Obviously, in therapy, when you're dealing with such intense aftermath and pain, those questions would come up. And this is shocking, actually. The answer is about, I would say, 98% unanimous, the same answer. It's either a shoulder shrug and a sound that goes kind of like, I don't know.
What?
Or it's, I don't know.
Do you think they really don't know?
That's the answer. I literally call this the 2 questions. It's a profound statement about how men are shaped psychologically and how there's so many unconscious proscripts and prescripts that are just being followed without much thought, without much consciousness, including getting married and having children. I know that sounds shocking, probably to a lot of women. However, that's just my experience in therapy in 20 years of working with men with secret sexual lives. And that's actually part of the problem. There's a lack of voice around gender, sex, this part of them. It's immature, underdeveloped. A lot of men are acting out unconsciously these social prescripts and proscripts without much thought. Shocking.
I'm going to interject here because I think I am way more cynical than you are. I think they absolutely know when they go, ugh, they just don't want to tell you because there's a lot of benefits to having a wife appliance or a spouse appliance. And I have to speak up for the men chumps here because women can be deceptive too. They cheat. We are gender and orientation neutral at Chump Lady. Cheating on people is a human problem. It's a character problem. But yeah, there's a huge overlay of patriarchy and I'm not going to disagree with you there. But having someone wholly invested in you benefits your life. It absolutely does. I say you're the front of normalcy. Having children benefits your life. Now, you may cancel your subscription to Adulting later and not pay support. Sarah knows what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. But they like the upstairs of their house very much.
And also, you get the same ego boost that you get from an affair. When you get married, you're the center of attention. Look at me, my beautiful wife. Look at me, my beautiful newborn babies. Look how manly I am with my young children. Until it gets boring, and the secret basement becomes more interesting than kind of the maintenance that's involved after that initial flurry of the new baby, the wedding, the big things that are easy. It's the hard stuff that becomes more difficult.
Yes, the secret sexual basement is inherited. It's a masculinity inheritance. Life gets hard, build a basement. Wink, wink. This is how you cope with life. This is how men are groomed. Yep, you guys are nailing it. It's a whole social inheritance. And yes, there's a lot of benefit, which is why it's inherited as part of masculinity. Men are taught, don't learn how to use your voice, use violence instead, violence over voice. And so building a basement instead of learning how to talk, use your voice, negotiate, communicate, and keep everything on the first floor. That's not what men are groomed into.
How do you explain deceptive women? My husband's ex-wife was a serial cheater.
Yeah, that's probably going to be a different story.
Different set of entitlements there, huh?
It's not going to be because they were shaped by masculine scripts. It's going to be from a different type of story. And of course, any gender, any person can be deceptive.
It's interesting, actually, when you talk about gender, if you think about how we react to different genders and affairs, a lot of time, if men go off with a much younger woman, there's kind of this, oh, look at them, they've upgraded, they've got themselves a better model. If they leave their kids behind, then again, it's kind of not terribly shocking. Whereas if I, as a woman, went off with a man 20 years younger than me and left the children, people would still be shocked. So there is a real difference in terms of the narrative in how we look at people that have affairs based on their gender.
Yes, if men have secret sexual basements and they're discovered, we don't even think abuse. It's so normalized. It's passed down to our psyches as humans, this masculinity script. If a woman had a secret sexual basement filled with prostitutes for years, people would immediately be like, she's insane and needs to be institutionalized or put in jail. Like something's really wrong with her. What kind of mother has a secret sexual basement with prostitutes for 30 years? If it's the father, the man, it's a totally different perception and initial understanding, Sarah, right? So you nailed it in terms of gender plays a huge role in just our thoughts, feelings, and automatic reactions to secret sexual basements. Yep.
That's where you could talk a bit about prostitution, because talk about things that get glossed over. I've been reading the work of Rachel Moran. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an Irish activist. She was a prostitute, and she's very vocal about not calling it sex work. It's not work, it's coercion. Many people are trafficked and you have to be very damaged to do this kind of work. And I have gotten such an education about secret sexual basements running my blog for 11 years. Entire retirement account spent on sex workers, men reviewing prostitutes like Amazon purchases, having whole communities, around this. That porn is kind of like this arms race of how much more degrading an act can you pay for. It's much more voyeuristic, and it's like a whole other level. And people have discovered, really dark things in that basement. And to me, this is another thing that the discourse glosses over. Like, we don't talk about the sex industry, what people are paying for, who's getting harmed by this. I think Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times he wrote a big thing on Pornhub and he's talked about sex trafficking. But on the whole, I don't think this is on anybody's radar, that what's being paid for in those massage parlors and who's getting hurt. And I would say, again, the reconciliation industrial complex, they have this thing, well, at least it was prostitutes. He wasn't having an emotional affair with somebody that he cared about. He's just buying this. I don't know. Can you wade into the deep, murky waters of paid sex and what people are doing in that basement?
You bring up a really important point, which is, right, we're talking about infidelity. With the internet in particular, infidelity has changed. It's not one romantic person and it happened for 2 years and that's it. And we're talking one person like the old days. And that's what an affair is. And that's infidelity. It's really easy to package infidelity as that. No, today, what's in a basement is hundreds of contacts with many, many people, either on camera, text, email, videos, porn. There's a huge problem with sexual violence and gender-based violence all over the world, including sex trafficking that intersects with those basements. There's a lot of dark, really violent subcultures of misogyny, brutality, and sexual violence all over the globe that are in those basements. There's compulsivity in those basements. There's sexual offending. There's sexual assaults. There's marital rape in those basements. So yes, when we're talking about infidelity and deceptive compartmentalized sexual lives, sometimes it's porn. Sometimes it's pretty simple down there. And a lot of times in this day and age, in our culture, it's really, really profound, the level of harm and violence and complexity and how that intersects with gender-based violence, sex trafficking. And so it actually contextualizes this whole discussion about secret sexual basements, which is what I'm saying is exercising masculine power and privilege. It's a psychological operation that's not called a psychological operation because the power structure doesn't want to call that out. And it is part of gender-based violence. The secret sexual basement is part of the whole system of gender-based violence. And all of those in a way connect.
Yeah. Do you see an arms race of this, that it's like, it's not enough to be transgressive with an affair or do whatever the naughty thing is. Like, you need to keep transgressing to get a bigger high. This is what I hear from people who write to me on the blog, that a little deceit doesn't give you the same frisson of danger and excitement that it used to. You got to keep pushing the boundaries and pushing the boundaries. The other thing I would say, there's so many horrors here in the basement, but the other part of it is that people discover the financial infidelity of it. Having a double life costs money. And I think weirdly, people understand those costs. When you're describing the trauma and experience that you went through as a chump, people can understand he spent the 401k on hookers. They may not understand your trauma at discovering a whole double life, but they can understand there's the college fund. There's that entitlement had a cost. Maybe they understand that you got chlamydia or something from this acting out. To me, it's like there doesn't seem to be a bottom to the basement. It's like the basement just gets more and more subterranean. And I guess this might be a good time to pivot to your work helping these people, because I got a question from a reader. It says, Dr. Minwalla's work is illuminating and resonates with me in many ways, as it clearly does other chumps. He's frequently referenced and praised on the blog. While I appreciate his theories about the secret sexual basement and his acknowledgement that double lives are abusive, I remain skeptical of therapy. The therapy is geared towards the abusers, and much of what I see on his site seems to fit with the sex addiction treatment and reconciliation models that offer victims of abuse hope that their abusers will change. And this also seems antithetical to the chump lady mantra of leave a cheater, gain a life, which makes chumps central. Question for Dr. Minwalla: why do you focus on the abusers rather than the victims? And what is your stance on recovery and reconciliation? Do you think that your services encourage this? And how is it not condoning further abuse? Do you think that people with double lives can change? And is it make it safe for victims to remain in relationships with them?
All right. Well, I actually help everybody. So abusers, victims, and relationships as kind of like a third entity. And then children and families are sometimes impacted. And helping people doesn't mean trying to save the marriage or even endorsing reconciliation at all. And in fact, if you look at the APA literature on how to treat abuse, it's never about trying to make the victim stay in an abusive relationship. A big mantra of my model is it's always healthy for human beings to emancipate themselves from abuse. And if you look at the literature, it is a mistake that often happens in couples therapy of focusing when there's an abuse situation on trying to help the relationship stay together. And that's actually considered wrong and inappropriate. So yeah, there is no save the marriage agenda here and there. I've spent 20 years helping everybody.
I'm curious, who comes to you? I mean, is it people who have secret sexual basements who are like, I'm tired of being this guy, I want help? Or my cynical suspicion is that it's usually their partners who are dragging them by their hairy little ears to your office and setting them down and go, get better, fix this, in hopium and in fear that they want to see if this can be salvaged. How do you people find you? And are these abusers invested in self-improvement?
Well, first of all, remember, I don't do treatment anymore. So I'm enjoying not doing treatment anymore. So in the past,
Oh, okay. All right. Well, in the past,
there's a huge amount of patients who come because of external crisis and pressures. Their lives are falling apart. They just got discovered. And a lot of times their partners and spouses and families and kids are a big part of that pressure. Over time, there can become more internal motivation for the process and experience. Over the years, there have been more men who come not so much because they're being pressured from the outside, but just from their own lives being so damaged and they're in so much pain. And just because over the years, people have come to know my work. So it seems like people are buying in before they even really get to me in the last part of my career. It's like most people who come to me are already pretty much resonating with what I'm offering and it has a lot of meaning to them.
Are they in pain because they've been discovered or because they've realised themselves that it's wrong what they're doing? I just wonder whether they're in pain because there are consequences or in pain because they've suddenly had a realisation that what they're doing is wrong. I'm just wondering whether there is any hope and whether these people who've been so abusive can actually genuinely change their ways because they want to rather than because they have to in order to maintain their very comfortable lives.
Usually they're coming because they're in just sheer crisis and everything's falling apart. And there's very little insight usually in the beginning of like, I've done something wrong and now I feel remorse and empathy and pain from that. And I'm so much pain about the pain I've caused. That would be, I think, a more advanced stage. So most of the time they're coming because they're in pain, period, and their lives are falling apart. And there's a lot of pressure and it takes a lot of time if they even get to empathy and remorse. And it's very different for different people. Like you were saying, Tracy, some basements get amped up over time and more stuff keeps happening in the basement. Some basements stay the same for 20 years and it doesn't really change that much. So there's a lot of diversity in secret sexual basement stories. There's also a lot of diversity in the patients that come to me. Some of them don't last very long. Some of them don't roll up their sleeves and do hard work. But when you study and do a lot of abuse work, I also used to work with sex offenders on parole. That was a different kind of work. There is a lot of potential for change with working with abuse. Humans can look at what they've done and undergo certain evolutions in their perspective, their feelings, and how much they integrate the learning from what they've done in terms of harming somebody. We can all learn when we harm somebody. All of us have harmed and abused. All of us have been victims and all of us experience trauma. So abuse is a universal experience as an abuser and as a victim. And there's always, I think, hope in reaching human beings to do better and to learn from what they've done and to look at their actions and make small changes. So the idea that there's zero hope and kind of cookie cutter formulas to understand complex human issues, I think that's where that goes south. Yeah.
But where chumps get tangled up is, I call it hopium. First of all, you probably have a job sometimes convincing partners that they're in abusive situations because that's not the usual message they're getting.
Be quite honest on that, because I do a lot of education and really make things logical. But the spouses, the intimate partners, the people on top of the secret sexual basement, the minute I start speaking on their experience, it resonates deeply. There's not like trying to make them believe that they've been abused. It's actually they're making me believe they've been abused.
No, I'm probably stating this wrong. And that's certainly been the experience of my blog. People feel validated by your work. They feel heard. This is abuse. I get it. I feel it. I'm living it. But then there's also this hopium, this hope that my pain will inform my partner, that it will hurt them to hurt me. And that, to me, is a very dangerous fulcrum, because that's not generally the experience. Or you're saying that is way down in the therapy range, empathy and compassion and your pain, feeling my pain. And people who are harmed, we want it so badly. We so want the person who hurt us to make it better. It is very dangerous. It's very profitable. And that people feel like, oh, there's hope here. I'm going to take this webinar that Dr. Minwalla has, and he's going to get it, and he's going to stop abusing me. And in my work, I'm the bucket of cold water who's like, don't you have something better to do with your life than stick around waiting for self-improvement from this guy? I would argue that meaningful consequences do not happen unless you impose consequences. Change. This person's not going to change unless they lose you. If they change at all, if they want to change at all, that's a whole other issue. And so you're really doing delicate surgery. You are dealing with people's fervent hope that this person that they're bonded to will care about them. And that by saying everyone can change and abusers can find their hearts again and not reoffend, it's a siren song for people who don't want to lose what they've invested, that whole house they built. They don't want to lose that house.
Yes. So, yeah, you're right on, Tracy. I love this term hopium. You want to sit in truth, especially with a survivor. And remember, IMR is the injury, intentionally manipulated reality. In my work, what is healing is intentionally accurate, authentic reality, IAR. And it's particularly important clinically. And so you don't want to give false hope. You want to be able to be strong enough, clinically surgical enough, and sit in the truth. The truth is often, we don't know. The truth is, I can't give you that kind of hope. And we're not doing a save the marriage anyway. We're trying to focus on an abuse problem and the trauma here. But also allowing people and empowering people the autonomy that once they're stronger, they can make these decisions for themselves. They don't need a therapist to tell them what to do. That's empowering for a survivor, is giving her or him or they the autonomy to restore to where they're strong enough where they can make informed decisions for themselves. It's up to them if they want to stay or not. I don't go on preaching about what they should do, and no therapist actually should.
I think one of the key questions that you had, Tracy, is how you spot whether someone's likely to have a basement in the first place, particularly if you've already been through this abusive situation. So do you have any advice on sort of getting a peek into the basement of horrors beforehand, before you trust yourself to another partner? And this question says, I'm traumatized by the abuse of infidelity. Are there signs to identify a cheater before he kicks me downstairs? And they always say, don't they, prevention's better than a cure. And that's the thing. Can we avoid being in this situation in the first place, having to unpick all this abusive behavior?
If your partner is clever and careful enough, they can trick you. And it's not a statement of your deficit. So it's a tricky question. What can people do to spot an abuser? Because it's putting a lot of, in some ways, the onus and responsibility on choosing better, which then goes back to shades of victim blaming and all of that back. But I would say, trust people when they show you who they are, right? Do you see them lying? If you see someone being dishonest, that's a dishonesty problem. And take that seriously. Now we'll get, a whole different discussion about falling in love and when our sexuality is involved and being affirmed, and how we don't look at red signs very well when we're doing that kind of thing. But I would say always, with any human interaction, start looking for honesty. And when you see dishonesty anywhere, I'd say take that seriously. That's part of their psyche, their character, their MO in life. It's part of how they navigate through the world. And it's a critical part because, again, in my postulate here, I'm saying dishonesty promotes disease. IMR, intentionally manipulated reality, promotes disease. intentionally accurate, authentic reality promotes health. So someone with a dishonesty problem is going to be toxic. I mean, how many relationships have ended because of one lie? Somebody tells you one lie, I'm out. I'm not even investing in this person, this relationship. That's a healthy response. That's how I respond. I'm out. I'm not playing that.
Yeah, well, see, but you know what your deal breakers are. And especially after you've gone through this meat grinder, is that you have to trust your own resiliency. That if somebody disappoints you and they're not what you had hoped that they would be, that you have to trust that you're strong enough to enforce your deal breaker, to go, I'm not getting kicked down those stairs. I'm out. I'm done. And it's hard. It's hard to assert yourself that way. It's hard to believe that you'll be okay, but you really will. I mean, you don't control what other people do, but you control how you react to things. You can invest in your own strength and resiliency. And that's usually how I answer the how will I ever trust again question.
And that's actually part of therapy. Is that's part of empowering a survivor, is working towards giving them those capacities back so that they can navigate in strength and resilience. And that is part of post-traumatic growth, is strength and resilience and tapping into that. And that is part of the healing. And then Sarah, I would actually say, let's actually think preventively, right? Because that was your question. What would it be like if we started to name the abuse, the dishonesty problem as an abuse problem, and having a secret sexual basement as a psychological operation? The whole time it's shaping the ego spinal cord of the people upstairs. Just naming the abuse is a huge step forward for society, for the professional field.
Yeah.
And for everyone, even our kids. What if we started just saying, oh, cheating is domestic abuse? What if on domestic abuse lists you had deceptive sexuality? That would be a step forward, right, Sarah? Like in terms of prevention, just starting to name as just a normal part of society. Cheating's abuse. It's a psychological operation. It's very normal. All the boys learn it. They talk about it in the locker room. Cheating is abuse.
Great. I was going to ask you what's next. What are you working on? Is this what you're working on?
Oh, man. I am actually trying to change masculinity and do my part, to be very honest. I think that masculinity needs a lot of help, and it's very serious. And a lot of the violence in the world will absolutely not change until we start shaping how we socialize boys and men into masculinity, and how we shape everybody, because nobody sees the secret sexual basement as abuse. So when we talk about shaping boys and men, we're also talking about how does everyone look at masculinity. That's my current passion, I guess. And where did that passion come from? From working with secret sexual basements for 20 years.
You're happy to get out of the basement and into the light.
I'm really happy to be out of clinical work. That's a really high intensity domain. Very serious, yes. And there is a huge relief in being outside that box right now and being able to be the Pied Piper for masculinity.
Well, I hope many people follow you.
I don't really care if you follow me or not. I'm going to keep playing my music because I know there's some people out there that really resonate with the truth. And the truth of a secret sexual basement is it's abusive. It's a psych op.
Thank you for the message.
You're welcome. And thank you, Tracy and Sarah. I mean, you guys are really powerful, mighty heroes, and you're pushing a really important story forward. And you're speaking for many people, many women as well, who are voiceless. And so I really appreciate your mission and what you're doing. It's been an honor to be with you guys.
Oh, we appreciate you. Thank you, Dr. Minwalla. Reach out to us. You can check us out at tellmehowyourmighty.com or check out the blog at chumplady.com. I'm always open to your suggestions there.